approvals. So we'll do roll call first. Delegate Stein, I see you online.
Here.
See you. Eric Meyer. Bob Allen. Here. Frederica Moser. Here. Brandy Espinola.
Here.
Matt Rowe.
This is Jim George for Matt.
Thank you, Jim. And it's right in front. Sarah Bender. Tom Parham. Clifford Mitchell. Jason DeBoe.
This is Debbie Cornwell for Jason today.
Thank you. Opie. Allison Breitnother.
Here.
Catherine McCall. Brandon Bowser. John Papavassiliou.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
And Bill Fawcett. All right. I believe we have a quorum. Great. Thank you very much, Rylan. So the meeting minutes from our last meeting were distributed online. So I hope you had a chance to take a look at that. Are there any edits, amendments, additions to the meeting minutes that anybody would like to put forward? Oh, thank you, Alicia. And Rylan, if you could mark down Alicia's present. So I guess second call on any amendments to the meeting minutes. Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Yes. Got through this last time. All right. That's the approval of the meeting minutes. So we're going to jump right into the agenda. We're going to start off with a session recap. And I think this is really important for us as we move forward. One thing we started last year is conversations in this body that we're trying to make regular about any statutory changes that we would want to see for the upcoming legislative session. And I think some of the bills that you're going to hear about were a direct result of conversations in this group. And again, we want to continue to have that conversation here so that we can be ready for next legislative session, although it feels like we just stepped out of legislative session. So just wanted to flag that for everybody to keep top of mind. I'm going to turn it over to the Department of Natural Resources Legislative Director, Dylan Baylor, to give us a recap on a few bills that are important for this adaptation resolution.
Awesome. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dylan Baylor, and I'm the Legislative Director here at DNR. Before I jump in, just a big shout out to Delegate Stein for all his help this year and his leadership on a variety of matters. Thank you for everything that you do. But I think just a quick agenda of what I'm going to run through. Firstly, I'm going to talk about some of the highlights from this legislative session, both from DNR's departmentals and also some other bills that were privately sponsored by legislators this session. And then I want to reserve a little bit of time as we start to talk about next legislative session and some of the priorities that this agency in particular is going to be looking towards. Once again, I'm Dylan Baylor. I am the Legislative Director here at DNR. It was my first session, but it was a great session. I think it was a learning experience, but I think the one thing that we both, Secretary and I, learned is there are a lot of friends and a lot of those legislators that are interested in the work that we do, both at DNR and across the state, agencies to advance resilience and adaptation across the state. I'm just really quickly for DNR, we introduced 11 departmentals, which was a large number. I think the most that our agency had seen in a while. 10 of those passed. They ranged from parks to Chesapeake and Coastal Services to the Coastmark Council. But out of those 10 that passed, I did just want to touch on 2 that I think are of keen interest to this group. So the first one being Senate Bill 299, Coastmark Council duties and authority of the council. Generally speaking, this legislation codified the current practice of the Coastmark Council to issue categorical exemptions. And in addition to that, it also granted the Coastmark Council the authority to recommend regulations for adoption by the Secretary. So the hope there is to have a long-term process with that council to develop regulations and put additional teeth in the work that the council does. Really quickly on that bill, and Delegate Stein, I know you were a leader on this in the legislature. I think the one thing that I really enjoyed the most was actually talking about the council with the legislature. It was a really great opportunity to re-educate all the new legislators on the important work that council does and why it is such an important tool for our capital investments as a state. The second bill that I wanted to talk about that was a DNR departmental is Senate Bill 253, Pay for Success procurement exemptions. Generally speaking, that's a pretty simple bill. It granted a really targeted procurement exemption for DNR when we issue Pay for Success contracts moving forward. This was the Conservation Finance Act from 2022 granted DNR and some other agencies the ability to issue Pay for Success contracts. But what we ran into here at the agency is that we weren't really able to effectively utilize them to their maximum potential just because of the way that the procurement process worked. So with this bill now, we will be able to use those much more efficiently and hopefully target some additional co-benefits and make sure that we're really getting the most bang for our buck for our restoration dollars as a state. In addition to the 11 DNR departmentals, the Critical Area Commission introduced 2 departmentals as well. And I want to touch on one of those really briefly. House Bill 233. I think it's the biggest overhaul of the Critical Area Commission since 2008, but I argue potentially of all time. Generally speaking, it really just incorporates resilience and equity throughout the entirety of the Critical Area Commission, and really will ensure that they have the tools and the ability to make sure that those outcomes are prioritized moving forward. There's going to be a lot of work to implement this bill, but I think the fact that the legislature took such a keen interest into that bill and the resilience and equity priorities, I think is a really interesting example of how we can potentially look to other programs of that bill is an example of how we can incorporate resilience through entire programs. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for us, and particularly this group. And now just moving on to a few of the private sponsor bills that I think are of priority for this group. And there was a ton, but I just want to touch on 2 really important ones. Senate Bill 148, sponsored by Senator Alonzo Washington, has been introduced for quite a few years now, and it finally passed this year. This bill will ensure that 40% of MDE's comprehensive flood management program has to be spent in underserved communities to ensure that we're building those communities and we're not leaving them behind moving forward. And then arguably, I think the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest, if not the biggest environmental bills, definitely the biggest for the Bay, was the whole Watershed Act, which I know a lot of individuals in this room worked on. Generally speaking, it really did an amazing job at incorporating the pillars of the Caesar report and the legislative policy in our statute. Generally speaking, what it does is it creates the framework in which DNR can select with our sister agencies 5 pilot watersheds for us to target for comprehensive restoration and ensure that there are community, nonprofit, federal, and local partners all at the table to ensure that we are effectively targeting those watersheds for kind of that comprehensive restoration. And it's going to be a long-term, it's going to be a lot of work to implement it. We've already started engaging in a lot of conversations here at DNR to just do that. But it's a really exciting opportunity to really pivot our thinking on Bay restoration and look to the Caesar report as a kind of a guiding light for the restoration work that we do. And that's kind of high level of a lot of the big issues that were addressed this session. I know there was a lot of other work as well. But with the remaining time, I did just briefly want to touch on next legislative session, because even though we did just step out of it, we already have to start planning for next year. But one of the top priorities for this agency as we move into next session is we really want the legislative package that DNR puts forth to really have a heightened focus on resilience and adaptation. So we are looking at a variety of different policy proposals, and I think this group is going to be a really strong partner in helping develop those proposals. And I think I spoke with Rylan before this. I think with the remaining time that we have set for this, I think it would be really exciting to open it up to the group to just hear if there are any high-level ideas or thoughts on legislative proposals, or at least issue areas that we should be working towards for next year. Because because I think we have a real opportunity to advance resilience and adaptation in the state next session, and we don't want to let that slip by. Happy to have a conversation if anybody has any thoughts or questions on the last legislative session, but I just kind of wanted to open it up to the group for any thoughts that they might have.
Great, thank you, Dylan. Yeah, with that, are there any questions, ideas, anything that you would like to flag as we start or continue to build out our resilience/adaptation package?
Jennifer Mishrahi, just want to again reiterate that I believe the most important thing for us to do is to ensure that you have the ample money that you need to do the critical work that you're doing. And so the most important thing is to unify behind a funding plan for the climate plan. One of the other committees listened to the Washington State plan. It's recorded and available to everyone to listen to. I'm hoping that we can hear Delegate Dana Stein's plan and some of the other alternatives like Renew. I don't think that this task force is going to listen to all the funding plans, but I hope that you'll listen to the recordings of them and that people will unite behind something that we can get done this session to ensure the important work of this committee to move forward fully funded.
Absolutely. Thank you. Delegate Stein?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. First, I want to thank you and Dylan for leading a very impressive legislative agenda this session with many significant accomplishments. And as Dylan noted, for example, the Critical Area Commission bill, a number of your bills as well as other legislation reflects an increasing focus on equity and resilience in climate adaptation as well as climate writ large. And so, next session, I've been interested in the idea of having some specific resilience and adaptation criteria be required by localities when they do their comp plans, so that there's a requirement for specific focus by localities in preparing for the impacts of of climate change. And we know some counties are already doing a very good job on that. Others maybe need to do more. So just some thoughts about this past session as well as moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Stein. I think you're hitting a really important piece here, and I think everybody in this room knows it, right? With resilience, it's about planning and it's about looking forward. And I think there's definitely a lot of spaces for us to better incorporate that into a multitude of the programs within DNR and across state government. Any other questions, comments? I know it's still May. So if you have ideas as we move forward, feel free to reach out to Dylan and I for us to incorporate and have some conversations around this. I think to Dylan's point, we have a really, really strong opportunity next legislative session to advance some of these, I think, building on conversations that were had with the legislature this year. And I just want to thank all of the staff from the multitude of agencies that participate in this working group, work on resilience every day. I think there was a great deal of education that happened across all of our agencies. Yeah, right.
I want to remind everybody we're also going to be responsible for drafting the recommendations for the Commission's annual report, which then hopefully can turn into legislative recommendations, but they don't necessarily have to be fully formed thoughts. So we have something that we want to carry on as an initiative, but we don't necessarily have a bill ready. This is something that we can propose as part of the Commission's annual report and kind of craft later into something that resembles the bill or something like that. So anyways, I'm just letting people know that their ideas are still helpful, even if they're not fully formed.
Yeah, that is a good point. We don't need language. We need ideas.
Yeah.
All right. Well, excellent. I think we are going to turn to the main event now for this meeting. And I really want to thank all the panelists that are going to help us out today and have this conversation. I know this is something that we've been discussing in ARWD for quite a while now in a multitude of different spaces. So excited for this. And I know Rylan is going to give a short presentation to kind of cue us up, and then we'll invite our presenters to the proverbial stage that we have created in this room.
All right. I have told the panelists that they don't have to sit in their panel seats yet because it is right in front of the room if you're not in here in the room. So it's a little scary to be in front of everybody already. So I'm just,
Captions on.
oh yes, absolutely. Oh wait, I have to do it on here. Sorry, running two computers is confusing sometimes. All right. I am going to spotlight it, so we can large it and close the chat. Oh, there we go. Okay, so why are we doing this panel? I want to remind everybody that we, as the ARWG in 2023, submitted a recommendation for the annual report that state agencies that are represented in the ARWG should prioritize funding to support the hiring of people with cultural competency to act as local community liaisons that serve to communicate and discuss climate change impacts in low-income communities. The ARWG will support conversation around this priority and work to align agency efforts. So that's what we're doing here today, is starting that conversation, because I know a lot of people are talking about this space, acknowledging its importance, but it's also not necessarily at the forefront of state operations right now. So we wanted to get this ball rolling with a diverse panel to kind of talk about how we are starting to implement that, and just across the board talking about utilizing local community liaisons. So how do we define these terms? Because this can be a little confusing. These are working definitions that we kind of invented while we were having lots of discussions around this topic. So full disclosure, this is our working definition. This can adapt and change over time as we grow to understand how we are utilizing these positions and working together. But what we came up with here is that a community liaison, for the purposes of this panel, we're defining as a trusted resident of a community, acting as a connector to engage the community in ongoing initiatives and is compensated for their lived experience and expertise. Now, also important to define here in our recommendation is cultural competency, which was actually a new term for me. I did come to find it is really common in the medical field. And this definition is pulled from the American Psychological Association, but that is the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact with people from cultures or belief systems different from one's own. And this is important because we want to acknowledge that there is this intelligence that is not quite captured in some of our, job descriptions or expertise, and that can be captured sort of in this terminology. And so one of the things we wanted to remind people of, and why having this community liaison relationship is important, is because of this spectrum of engagement that I think a lot of us might be somewhat familiar with. And I know this is very small for the people in the room, so I'm going to talk you through it instead. So it goes up in degree of difficulty, but also in public impact from left to right here. The first stage is inform. So this is just when you're talking to a community, here is the project that we're going to be doing in your community. Then the next step up is consult. That is more getting information from the community members. So talking about your project, but also seeing how you feel about this project and possibly adapting as such. A step up from that is involving. That is actively bringing those community members into your work. Maybe you already have a project going, but you are asking for community input directly. Then there's collaborate. That is a true partnership with the public, seeking advice and innovations that actually become embedded inside the work. And then the last step, of course, and sometimes definitely, or not sometimes, it's often the most difficult, is empowerment. And this is actually when you empower the community themselves to be the director of the work. You're not coming into a community and telling you this is what we're doing. You're empowering them from start to finish to make those decisions. And that is often difficult, but having a community liaison relationship allows you to start building that community empowerment in a way that actually will hopefully make everyone's jobs a little bit easier and make it more intentional, our project selection. So we have here today 4 panelists that I'm going to invite to come up and sit in your seats over here. We're going to turn the camera so that they can be highlighted. We have Joan Peacock, who is the Director of Audit and Financial Compliance Unit at the Department of Budget and Management. We also have Shirley Lake, who is a community ambassador for Envision the Chop Tank. And we have Joanna Ogburn, who is the coordinator of Envision the Chop Tank. And we have Sasha Land, who is the Coastal Resilience Program Director at the Department of Natural Resources. I did provide bios for all of them if you want to look into their particular expertise, but we are very lucky to have them joining us here in person today. And thank you all so much. And as a co-moderator, we have Sabine Bailey, who is a NOAA fellow with TNC and DNR, who will be helping lead some of the guided questions. The format this will follow is that we have a set of 4 questions that we're going to go through with all the panelists first. Then we will open the floor to questions from the audience. And then if time allows, we have some extra questions. But hopefully we encourage you all to have thoughtful questions for our panelists here today. I'm going to hand it over to Sabine.
Thank you so much, Ryland, and I'm really honored to be moderating this panel. Thank you so much all for coming. Really excited to dig into this. So before we start our questions, I thought maybe spend a little bit of time and just give a brief introduction as to what your experience and expertise is in the space of being or working with a community liaison. So Shirley, if you're ready.
Excuse me. Okay. My name is Shirley Lake, and I live in the town of Jonestown, and I am a community ambassador working with Envision the Chop Tank.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah. We'll just go down the line.
Just hopeful.
Yeah. Well, hi everybody. Good to see everyone. Some new faces and old faces, which is wonderful to see. So yes, I serve as the coordinator for the Envision the Chop Tank Partnership, together with Emily Thorpe and Hillary Gibson, who are here in the back of the room. We have a very small conservation business called JBO Conservation that works on building these kinds of partnerships, you know, multi-stakeholder, multi-sector, all the jargon terms we all love. And one of the primary ones we've been focused on building since late 2015, so almost 9 years now, has been Envision the Chop Tank, which of course is located in the Chop Tank watershed. So mostly on the eastern shore of Maryland, but headwaters in Delaware. And that's where we got to meet Shirley Lake, which has been absolutely fantastic. We've been doing a lot of work. We have multiple work groups. I should start and say the whole partnership is really focused on improving the health of the Chop Tank watershed. And for us, that means certainly the environmental health, but also the health of the communities that live and work around the watershed. And really working at that intersection has been sort of the sweet spot for us and what we hope to kind of continue doing. We have a work group that's focused on engaging disenfranchised communities. That's about making sure the distribution of resources that we all have is more equitable. And we do a lot of work in the climate resilience space, particularly with a number of communities on the ground. And one of them being Jonestown, where Shirley lives and is from. As part of that work, we've done on the ground work with 3 communities so far, really trying to listen and understand what the different challenges are, then develop solutions together. And I'm excited to say, I think in June, we're going to break ground on 12 practices in Jonestown. That's the community we've been working with the longest, about $390,000 to start mitigating some of the significant stormwater flooding impacts that they're running into. Another initiative this work group has been focused on is building a program called Lead the Shore, which is a leadership program to really put the power back in the hands of these communities. So to provide the tools, the information, the connections, so they can build their visions for resilience and carry them out. So those 2 initiatives, I have to say, we wouldn't have been able to do without community ambassadors like Shirley. I can't say enough. She doesn't like it when I talk about it, but she's very modest, but absolutely critical to doing that work and making it effective. And in a way that we're building trust and people feel comfortable, they feel heard, and they're part of the process. So I just can't say enough for those roles. And I just want to thank this group so much for bringing this topic to the forefront, to the state. We really appreciate it. Again, absolutely critical. And thank you for, I think, your partnership over the years of Vision. I know we've got MDE, DNR, Carrie has been a long time member in the back there, Carrie Decker, MDP, MDA. We've got all the acronyms, not all of them, but almost all. So just thank you all for your support over the years. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And really excited to dig into more of all of that process that you just mentioned so that we can think about how it can apply for state agencies. Yes. Jennifer, please.
So I'm Joan Peacock with Department of Budget and Management, and I have zero experience in community liaisons. But I'm very excited to hear about the work that the group is doing and the envision to like start this I guess process or this type of position, or I don't want to tag it into a certain thing, but what my team does, I have John Nickerson here with me. I'm going to shout him out every year, and I think I have our town end online, and we are here to provide maybe some guidance, support, suggestions, recommendations to see how we can support this initiative, see how the state can make this happen, basically. And I'm very excited about that. It sounds from, hearing conversations, talking with Rylan, and hearing this, the expertise right here sitting next to me. It sounds like this is a great, and I will also say doing a little online research to see what's happening in other states with this type of initiative. It does sound like a very, very good, I guess, recommendation, and I am here to help as much as I can.
Yeah, and we really appreciate that because figuring out how to even set up a position like that is critical.
Right.
So really appreciate
And
your perspective.
Let me just also give a little shout out. It won't be just me. Like making sure I have the right people, Office of Procurement, our Office of Personnel within Department of Budget and Management, all the right people involved to help support and make sure we're doing everything the right way and be successful.
I'm so glad to be having this conversation in this venue. I feel like, I have been thinking about that spectrum of community engagement for a long time, but often feel like in the past it's been on the periphery or just a small portion or 10% of the work that I have done. And it started to gain momentum, and I think now we can see where that momentum is leading. So I'm very hopeful and encouraged to be having this conversation about this community-based work at a broader level and within the Maryland Climate Commission, ARWG. I will say that my position now, I'm kind of maybe looking down from the state level, but that's not where I started. I started more at the community level and working place-based and working and really trying to understand from a community level kind of around, mainly I work in kind of the flood vulnerability and kind of understanding what does vulnerability mean to our communities in Maryland and to what, because I know what vulnerability means to me from sitting in the Maryland Coastal Zone program, but that can mean something very different at the community level. So I think that's where I started, and now I'm so excited to hear about Lead the Shore because that was an idea that was brought to us from our federal partners from Lead the Coast. And so I'm really, that was such an aha moment for me when I was sitting and listening, but I also knew from where I sat at the state level, there was no way that was really kind of implementable or made sense for a state agency to take that and run with it. So I'm really kind of where I see my role is like, I would love to figure out, and I think, Carrie's done some of this work over the years, is like, where can we help be the seeds? Where can we help get things started that really propel things forward? We can't be everywhere in every place in every community, but I think that there are really some awesome opportunities to be kind of that little push forward or that movement, but also to understand what's needed at that community level in order to influence. We just talked about policy and legislation to influence kind of what those drivers are and where we need to kind of push and pull, both at a local level, but also at a state level. So I think that's kind of where I see it.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I feel like, we were very intentional on who we would love to invite on the panel, and you all bring such really, I don't overuse word, but true, unique perspectives to this work. So really appreciate you all being here. So for the first question, also maybe want to preface that this is a safe space and we are all learning and doing this work. And so, if the term, whatever you're using, doesn't feel right at the moment, I think that's totally fine. And, I think, we're all in a learning space. So our first question is, what are the benefits and opportunities working with a community liaison or working with the organization that provides that community liaison space. And I will not put you on the spot again first. Back to you. And so maybe Joanna, since you were kind of talking about it a little bit, maybe you can talk a bit more.
Yeah, so the benefits, right? There's a lot. I would say a lot of benefits. The community, so we've used the term community ambassadors, but it sounds like it's the same as your definition of community liaisons. They play a variety of different roles for us, and I'll let Shirley speak to that a little bit more. But the benefit of having someone in the community who understands the community, they have the on-the-ground knowledge, they have that level of expertise, the cultural competency, as you brought up earlier, Ryland did, excuse me. It's just critical to being able to, one, be able to, should I put this, kind of walk into a community and not have someone say, please turn right back around and try again. You have a trusted person there to help you understand the community's needs, the perspectives, to help you build relationships. They're there day to day, so they know when things are going on. Maybe we need to adapt the project a little bit. That's really critical for us. Sometimes we need to know, should we be going faster? Should we be going slower? Is the communication good? Is it not good enough? And also to help us develop the solution that's going to be right and that's going to be sustainable for the community. We really don't have that expertise. We don't have the on-the-ground knowledge to know what's going to work in each community, and it's going to be different for every single one we work with. So those folks are absolutely critical to help make sure the project, number one, is something the whole community feels comfortable with, but two, is a project that's going to be lasting and folks can really rally around, and it's going to solve the problem that they feel is most important. Kind of like you said, Sasha, the vulnerability that is most important for the community to address. I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job, but keep,
No, it's okay. And this is, if something comes up as we continue talking, of course, welcome those thoughts as well. And Shirley, I was wondering whether, just to sort of give that feedback of what do you see as some of the benefits of being a community ambassador, and how does that sort of relationship support the community of Jonestown?
So for one, you live in the community and you know most of the people, and you understand the history in that town, because I have to be honest, some of the relationships, and I'm going to use Jonestown, when it comes to agencies and organizations, there isn't a huge trust there. So you cannot just walk into the community, not knowing the people and just say, hey, we want to do this, because the first I get questions like, what if they do this, can they come and take my land? So I get questions like that. There have been issues in the past. There were water issues several years ago. And some people are still upset about that. So again, the trust with government agencies is just not there. So you have to have an individual to go in that they can trust, that you're giving them the information. And they can say to you, okay, so you're saying they're not going to take my land if I allow this. No, it's a grant. They're going to come in and help you. It makes it a little easier for them. Also understanding some of the terms that are being used. Some of the things that you're talking about, they probably be doing, but they don't understand the terms that you're using. So visiting the chop tank, they made sure that we had education, and we learned about a lot of the terms so that we could also explain to community members. I like to add a piece to your continuum when you were saying empowerment, but also it's allowing communities to start trusting governmental agencies again. So, and I think that is a very important piece.
And that is, so critical, especially the fact that often as state agencies, we do not acknowledge sort of the historical harms that may have happened in the past. And so being able to bring that to light and being able to then start from that relationship and build that trust to then, as you mentioned, also that education and making the terms accessible, I think is also really important and such a critical piece of the community lead, absolutely, or community ambassador. Also want to welcome both you, Joan and Sasa, if you have anything to add to that, of just what are some of the benefits of a community liaison program.
I'll just say that, Shirley, thanks for bringing up that education piece. As someone who has come into a community where there is a severe distrust, and I will use the word severe, of this agency, and there would be no way for me to have understood why there was that distrust. There is not an agency record of, hey, this is what's accumulated over decades, right? And in some cases, maybe hundreds of years, depending on where you're working. And so I think for someone to provide that information and education and understanding that it's not you, it's not me directly, but it's, there is this undercurrent of distrust, but also to help create that bridge, because the hurts of the past are not something that we carry currently, right? Because we don't necessarily, we're not bringing those along with us, but if we don't understand that, then we're not going to be able to move forward within that community. So I think without having those perspectives, and I have done it, so I can say we definitely put our foot in our mouth and we say things that just kind of show our naive, and we're not doing it intentionally, but it's from a lack of awareness and a lack of understanding. So I think in addition to what everyone has added, I really just want to kind of emphasize that point, because it was pretty uncomfortable. It was not, and I will say that is something though I want to kind of create some understanding, and I think it can happen maybe faster with community liaisons or ambassadors. That lack of trust really, it takes years to overcome, and it's not a small hurdle, and so I don't think we shouldn't discount that in this work. I think the other understanding that maybe I would bring to the conversation is that there are complex, the issues that we are working on from the Department of Natural Resources are complex, but we all live in communities, we all work in communities. There's a variety of other kind of issues that are going on, and they're all interconnected. And oftentimes when we're sitting at our computers and we're doing our audits online is what I call them, when I'm looking at our maps, like that gets lost, right? Or we're detached from it because they're different colors on a screen. But I think it's really so instrumental, the role of the liaison, to kind of really have those open dialogue about kind of what are some of the complexities, even at a neighborhood issue, level, because there's county level data, there's municipal level data, but that really doesn't kind of dig into really that spot on the landscape. So I think kind of understanding that dynamic is really important, and what some of those additional drivers outside of the environmental, that community, or neighborhood is facing. So I love that.
Yeah, really great points. And I hear like the reciprocity of those relationships to build that trust, of both learning both ways, and just the ground truthing that the community liaison can do that a desktop audit would never be able to do. We can move on to the next question, but I also want to make sure.
Yeah, I'll just, I think the only thing, obviously I have no experience with this, but just everything that I've heard or, researched and looked at, it could only benefit or ensure our project's successful. And I think that, just as being mentioned, that when you engage the community and you get them, I think this goes to Ryland's little charge or whatever, you empower them, and, if you build that relationship, and I'm just thinking of other things that I work on and do, and the more that you develop a relationship, you get feedback of how things can be maybe done more efficiently, or be more effective, and things that, to Sasha's point, that you may not have coming in from the outside, you might not be aware of, but when you start asking the people that live there, in the community, and they feel open enough to share their experience and their knowledge, that just may help the project be more successful and more efficient.
Yep, 100%. And so, we talk about these great benefits that come from a community liaison program, but certainly setting something like that up does not come without its challenges as well. So we do want to touch on that and just ask, what are the challenges of developing a community liaison position and perhaps being a community liaison as well? Yeah, quickly eyebrows back. If anyone is very eager to talk about some of that process, we'll keep it open this time. So,
I'll start with that one. Yes, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here. But I think that the challenge is to figure out what is the best vehicle to use for the state and how to set that up, whether it's having this position maybe hired through an organization that we're partnering with, a state's partner or working with, or if it's the state actually hiring that individual. And I say that loosely because there could be several different ways to do that. We could do like a contractual state, special payments contractual position. And we could also do like an independent contractor through state procurement. I will tell you that, like, listening to all this, and one of the big questions I do have is, how do you find those people, and what's the criteria to determine, because that's, when you're looking for, hiring someone, special payments payroll or a contractor, independent contractor, you have like this criteria. So this is sort of like a somewhat unique position because you're someone who lives in, paying attention, lives in the community, knows the people, and how are you ensuring that you're getting like the best person? And I'm sure a factor has to be someone that can devote enough time. And then that goes to I guess questions I know that we talked to Ryland about, how long would you be engaging this community liaison person? Going to be for one project, multiple projects, how big of an area you're talking about. So there's a lot of, I think, factors, and you may need to consider, it might be that we have to consider, like, here's the factors to consider to determine which type of state vehicle you use in order to hire a community liaison person, or ambassador, or whatever, however you want to title it. So I think I would say those are some of the challenges. I'll throw that out there for anybody else to add on.
Quick follow up on that in terms of just the mechanism of either special contract, I don't know the right term, procurement or contract or special position. Wondering, like, is that burdensome for the community liaison in a way where they would have to maybe track their hours, or just wondering, like, what is potentially the challenge for the community liaison? Or maybe it's like a W-9 where taxes are not incorporated, or just wanting to ask if you could speak a bit to that.
So I would say, I'm going to ask John, who's here to speak up if I'm saying anything incorrectly, or Mark, who is online. I'll be honest with you, I think, and let me also share that a lot of my background is audit. So I'm bringing that perspective as well. So from, if you are, state employee hired as a state contractor, or if you're going to be an independent contractor, either way, I would imagine that I would say that you would still have to be tracking your time. That would, so there's no benefit of one or the other with that. There's different paths and I think we might get into this question later, but on the timeline for how long one thing takes versus the other, you have to, I know you would be working a lot with Department of Budget Management, for if you decide that special payments payroll, hiring an independent or state contractor position, you have to work with our budget unit to get that approved. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the exact process or how easy or hard that is. You would also be working with our Office of Personnel, and it might be, making sure that we have the right, terms and conditions and all that type of thing for a contract. For on the procurement side, if you're working more with Office State Procurement. Again, I think it depends on how long. Usually a contractual position with the state is a temporary position, so it's not very long term. So that there's a lot of factors to consider. I from the perspective of the community liaison person, I don't think either one way or the other. I don't think there's this is more burdensome than this. Yes.
Thank you.
So maybe just to add to that, maybe step a little bit out of state procurement. I think to me, one of the greatest challenges is creating that network of liaisons across a landscape and whatever that landscape is, because really, yes, there are all those hurdles with state procurement, but this isn't just a state level kind of issue. And I really think that it's going to take those public-private NGO partnerships and figuring out a framework, and then where the state fits in, where utilizing some of our federal resources, where there might be private partnerships. I mean, the need is so great. And even though we're a small but mighty state, if you look at our geography, there's a lot, even within our coastal zone, which is mainly where I focus, but look across the state. And I think the need for this is great. So I kind of see that as one of the major challenges, is how do you kind of put these networks together.
So working as a community investor, one of the challenges I would think presents itself is the key word is trusted person. So finding that person. But in the small town of Jonestown, we actually have 3 people. And they're like, for me, it's like Klein Street. So I know most of the people on Klein Street, and I can communicate with them. You have Miss Hubbard, who's on the side. I already know she doesn't want anybody coming in her home. I have to call her first or whatever. And then when you go into Jonestown, you have other people that are connected there. So we have like 3 people. So making it a position, and it's challenging where you're hiring somebody. I think you're still sending in, could possibly be someone strange to a person. So I don't know anything about the budgeting and funding piece of it, but it kind of works. I don't know if it's a sort of a stipend system or something that could be done as people are paid for the different projects. For me, I work a full-time job and I also teach. So I'm doing this the time that I have. So there may be something that I cannot work on and someone else may need to come in and pick up there. So I think that is one of the challenges that I see.
Yeah, 100%. The fact that there's maybe much more needed flexibility in the potential vehicles that we currently have to be able to accommodate the fact that you are working a full-time job and are also teaching. I mean, I think that's the case for a lot of community liaisons. So having to factor in that flexibility of you are doing this with the time left available to you. Yeah.
I don't also want to lose the flexibility that Shirley's talking about with multiple perspectives, because that was something I had written down as well. Like, you're right, street by street, people have different experiences and people have different comfort levels with who they kind of connect with in their own social network. So I think I don't want to lose that in the notes either, is that it's a community liaison is not just one person. And I think the flexibility to think that through, because that is hard. And if you're, at a contractual level, that's usually with one entity or one individual. So I want to make sure that part is captured as well.
I mean, and that brings a good point. I mean, I think Shirley, because I think you need to figure out, the more that I hear about this, it's not going to be, this is going to be the set standard way that we do business with, hiring or getting a community liaison engaged, because I think you're going to have to look at the community, what works. Are we engaging people that have full-time jobs? And are we doing some, where we have someone that's fully dedicated to this, that can, and that can kind of reach out to all the different people that they know will bring different perspectives. So I think it's going to have to be on a case by case, project by project basis. And I will say that again, and I'm gonna let Don kind of speak a little bit too. But I think, from the state side, if we engaged in hiring this type of person, whichever way, through procurement or through our payroll, we're gonna have to make sure that we know what the performance measures are, and what I don't want to say deliverables, but like what we're hiring this individual for and what we want them to accomplish. And, we want to make sure that we're clear to that person as well, that this is what our expectations are. So I'm going to let John add on.
Yeah, I mean, I can add from sort of an administrative fiscal perspective. There's always going to be that side of something with the funding we've got, important done. I mean, just hearing about this, I mean, I think it's kind of putting together kind of a matrix and what you want. I mean, I think at a high level, you're going to have to figure out, is this being done for, somewhere else, or is this kind of totally new because of the magnitude and scale? So are you looking at trying to do this statewide, the agency level, both? And I think somebody mentioned money earlier. So money drives the train at the end of the day. So more than likely, this is people are volunteering, and that's a whole nother process that you can, I guess, maybe have in your toolbox. But I think, it's a matter of coming up with a framework, getting all these, you're having a conversation now, but then getting it down on paper so that when you implement it, you know what all the impacts are so that you're not impeded with roadblocks and hurdles, because we like to say, that the logistic finance side, you like it to be seamless behind the scenes. And when it doesn't, then you lose people that may want to participate. And yes, if, at a high level, if we're talking about paying people, I mean, money basically goes out the door one of two ways. It's either an HR action or a contract. And oh, by the way, there's usually tax implications too. So there's, not to get way into the weeds, but because I think what you want to do is kind of have this initial discussion and kind of, get all these items in writing, so that then when you kind of go down the rabbit hole, which way is the best. And also probably I would think I don't know that one cookie cutter way is going to work either. I mean, I don't know. So you're going to want to have probably multiple tools available, but at the same time, you can't do two birds and cover some. So anyway, I think that's just some initial comments. If anybody wants to get into more of a deeper discussion about the mechanisms and add to it, but
I think those are really good initial thoughts based off of what you were just hearing, and it sounds like, again, that flexibility case by case, and maybe thinking about if that's even possible, of like, how do you potentially set up a different type of mechanism? But that's for another time. Joanna, before we move on to the next question, I was wondering if you had any thoughts that you wanted to add to some of the challenges maybe you've encountered.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of the points have already been mentioned. The need for flexibility is, absolutely critical. Sasha, I think your point to we'll need public-private partnerships, I think you did on there for a variety of reasons. I think one of the most important things about engaging with communities is continuity. And if you're going to start it, that you're going to be there over the long term. And is that something a state is able to do, administration to administration, or what are the challenges you might run into there? So having a partner on board, a nonprofit, an entity, whatever it is, that can fill in if there's a need to do that at certain times. I think it's important to think about that. Also to have, I don't know, and Shirley, you could speak to this, if all community ambassadors would be comfortable having a contract directly from the state, or would want to kind of go that route. I mean, just from a personal standpoint, that can be intimidating. I'll say, reading through those. So that may not always be the easiest way to do something like that. The challenges for us are one of the things you all mentioned, funding. So we are wholly grant funded, all the work that we do, and a lot of grants don't support these kinds of things, or if they do, they're very limited in scope, what you can use them for, how you can use them, what you have to, all the backup stuff you have to have for it, which is absolutely valid and needed. This is public money. We recognize that. So that's sort of what we handle on the back end, but there's no easy way to do this. We get funding from every single place we possibly can to do this work. And when we can't get that funding, we find a way to backfill it ourselves. So it's not easy. There's not a lot of grant programs out there that will support these kinds of funds and in a flexible way. So that's our biggest challenge. I think the other one you brought up is how do you find the right person or people? I think Shirley, you're dead on. It takes multiple people to do this work. Like Shirley, so she focuses on sort of one part of the community, but she's also the main one who's been working with My Coast. So Kate, so yeah, there you go. Yeah. So she's been kind of the key person who's learned how to do that and is sharing that information with the community. Every time there's a storm, is taking pictures, sending them our way, making sure we're getting that documentation. Different ambassadors kind of focus on different things. And part of that is interest, part of it is time, availability, and the people they know. So multiple is really important. And then I think one thing that I think about and we think about, and I hope we're doing a good job at this and being transparent, but is how do you also equitably distribute community ambassador funds? So what happens if all of a sudden you have 6 people that want to do it? What do you do with that? Can we afford it? So how do you make it transparent for the community you're engaging? Here's an opportunity. Here's how we can do it. Here's what we have available, and be honest about that. And then, just thinking through those aspects of it too. So we do not have it all figured out, but we are learning. And I think the best part is having folks like Shirley on our other ambassadors to sort of bounce ideas off of and to let us know when we're getting it wrong, I think is the kind of the key there too. So lots of challenges, but they're workable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you just touched on the next question, which is how do you, I think as environmental practitioners, a really big question that we often come to when we try to do this work is how do you identify or connect with potential liaisons, or how did you connect to the organization that was, proposing this type of position? And maybe I'll just let you continue kind of the tangent that you,
Yeah, you can speak to that. Yeah, the tangent thing. Yeah, probably you too. So how do we find these wonderful people? Time, I think I can't underscore enough the time it takes to build trust that someone would want to play that role in a community and to work with us and to get to know us more than they may ever want to. And I think in finding the right person, that's where it really does take time. I think we started working with Jonestown in 2019. So we're 5 years in, which seems crazy. And it was probably 3 years before we started doing the community ambassador piece, I believe. Yes, it would have been 3 years in. And so we had time to sort of get to know community members, see who was sort of naturally stepping up, kind of watch, this sounds really creepy, but sort of watch interactions and just see.
Is that how you found Shirley?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. We started by just having community meetings and, whoever showed up, and that kind of gradually grew. And folks that just sort of naturally seem interested in doing more work and in being more engaged and were interested in it. Then I think we just sort of asked the question, would you be interested in playing this kind of role for us? It was very organic. I can't say it was a well-planned, well-thought-out process for us. We just sort of grew with the project work we were doing at the time. But really taking that time to engage with the community, kind of see who are the voices that are popping up and the ones that may not be as vocal, but are really trusted and are the ones that are kind of really integral in getting the things done in the community and sort of getting that understanding of who are the right people. It does take time. So I hope there's no prescription there, I guess, that I'm offering up, but
but I think that's helpful, and I'm not answering the question. I'm actually probably giving a problem to the question or that you suggested, but I do think that part of the problem of putting out, like, here's a position or we're looking for an independent contractor, makes it more of a job. And it is a job, but it's, you want someone, I think, that's not looking at it as just a job. If I'm understanding this correctly, I don't have the answer to that. I know one of the things that when I'm speaking to Ryland, like, and I think John mentioned this is, I don't know if other states are doing something like this, or if there's, a proven program out there for how to select a community liaison. Because, I would think how you did it is perfect, because you're seeing who's going to step up and who is a leader or a person of knowledge in the community. And I'll be honest with you, you don't want someone stepping up that may know the community, but no one else in that community trusts them. So, and that's the reality, right?
That happens. Yeah.
Right. So, and if you're just, putting a position or an independent contractor out there, I don't know if you can get that through an interview process. As far as the state versus, it's a good point, versus an organization hiring an individual. You're right. Some people might feel like, and actually might feel like, oh, this is more like a state job or whatever, which, it would be, but state jobs can be fun too. The other thing that I would say that is the organizations might be more intergrained in the community versus the state agency people. So I know, probably I'm not helping this cause.
I think what you're calling out makes a lot of sense. There are many different mechanisms to be able to engage communities. You can go through CBPUB, community-based organizations. You can go through a specific individual. There are multiple ways to do this type of work. I think for today, we were just trying to understand, is it possible? How do we make it possible for one of these mechanisms to be able to work, of compensating a community liaison for their expertise and their knowledge and experience? And I think, just sort of the wording and the approach of how to create a state job.
Right.
I'm just gonna it is. You are totally right. It is because it's compensated. But
and it can be
how do
done.
we,
And I think it's,
how do we introduce that?
Right.
That makes it more accessible and works better than
right. And maybe it's
the usual mechanism that we do.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Maybe it's when we put it out there as a state job, we're not using, and Mark's on the line. He's probably going to give me later, but we put it out there in a different way, and we're following all the state guidelines, but it's not, here's this job's posted, submit your resume. Maybe we work with the organizations involved in the project or know the community. Yeah, sure.
So you don't have to post the job if it's a contractual position. Statute only says that you have to make a reasonable effort to solicit from the public. So if you've come up with a mechanism for making a selection that doesn't include posting it online and doing it like a lot of the state jobs, that's acceptable to us. So you're spot on with it, Joan.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
If I may add, I have to say that the people are out there. There are people out doing volunteer work, working with small organizations that are working with these communities. And if you connect with them, they can tell you a contact person in that community. For us, I have to say, it was Miss Paulette. She was a part of Envision the Chop Tank, and we were part of the Jonestown Community Development Corporation. And she kind of brought the information to us. And as we were attending the meetings, and then more people started coming from Jonestown, then they were able to see who the trusted individuals were in the community. So they're out there. And most of the time, if you go to small organizations and you say, I need to connect with this particular community, most of them can tell you a contact person for the community.
Yeah, and that's so true. And it goes back to sort of that time needed to be able to even do that work of connecting to the CEOs or to the smaller communities and then continuing that contact. And before we move on to the next question, I'm kind of looking at the time and maybe we need to. I just wanted to make sure that, Sasha, if you want to add anything. Thank you. this is really a follow-up to to the last question of identifying, but then as you just mentioned, sustaining that relationship is really important, especially if you want to show up and show that you are committed to doing this type of work. So the last question is, what are the existing or needed mechanisms to maintain relationships between the organization and community liaison? Maybe Sasha, you don't have to go first, but just wanted to make sure that you have enough time on.
This question, I'm going to admit, was a little bit hard for me. I think, you know, just like a community liaison is going to be different, and that's going to look different between each community. I think the mechanisms and how you do the work is going to be different. But it, like sitting where I sit and wanting to be successful and have meaningful impact in a community, I think for me it's really kind of thinking about how we create that framework and how we think about the different mechanisms that are available, and you know, just creating that, just like those different pathways. So whether that we're now much more in a digital world than we used to be, I think sitting here, if this was 5 years, 6 years, I would say everything has to be done in person. You're talking with those people one-on-one, you're going to their homes. Maybe that's still the case in certain communities, and I certainly think it is, but I think there's much more acceptance of like the digital platforms than there was, and maybe not in certain communities, but I think that is more out in the forefront than it had been. So I think just kind of helping to think through that framework, but also helping to think about what is that level of commitment and continuity, and what does communication mean from both sides, whether it's the organization side or whether it's the community side, and what do they kind of think of, like what would be successful. But I think something too is maybe just to think about is understanding the different roles, expertise, and responsibilities. There's often a misperception of what each other can and can't do. And then I think too, maybe just to kind of add this into the mix is like, as often in communities or in different households, right? Priorities shift, fatigue sets in, life happens, like some unexpected life events happen. So how do you kind of create that, maybe I'll just use framework. I really don't like that word, but I don't know what else to use. Sounds so bureaucratic. But like, how do you kind of set those frames in place to kind of understand that things ebb and flow, and that doesn't mean you're not successful. It just kind of is what it is. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to be adaptive, which I think is the working group, part of the working group. So, and I think one note as well is maybe something in terms of just what is the role of the state in helping sustaining these types of relationships, and just trying to understand where, as you mentioned previously, like where the state agency's role fits into this entire framework. Anyone else have any thoughts as to what are some of the things that have helped continue this relationship? Clearly, you're both looking at each other. So I need to figure out who wants to answer first.
All right, well, I'll say things, but you have to correct me if I'm not right.
That this is on the panel.
Yeah, I think, so I'd be very curious to hear Shirley's thoughts on sort of the digital piece or virtual piece as opposed to in person. I'll say for me, my answer will always be, you've got to put the time in. You need to be in person and be as available as possible. But we're really on the ground doing that work together. So that might be a different look than sort of what the state is, different role for the state, right? And that's where those public-private partnerships can come into play. I would say communication is incredibly important. And I'll be the first to say we are not always as good as we should be. So, but as constant as you can be. Trying to be clear with expectations, what we're able to do, what we're hoping they can do, but having that flexibility. Things do happen, life happens to both sides. Sasha, we've had that exact thing pop up where someone had several family emergencies and they couldn't be a community ambassador anymore, which is absolutely valid, and they did what they needed to do. And things did slow down for a bit with that community, but we've got another person on board. So again, having that resilience with more than one is really handy. So yeah, communication, I think transparency is really important. Being available, we're at events. We were at an event last night down at a neighborhood outside of St. Michael's, one of the communities we're working with. And it's after hours, it's on the weekends when we take phone calls when you need to take them. Or we try to. Sometimes when it comes after 10 o'clock, that's where I cut the line there. But you know who would do that? And then I'll just say again, continuity is just absolutely critical. I think if you're the organization doing this work, being able to commit over the long term. This isn't a 1-year commitment. It's not a 2-year commitment. It's not we come in and do a project, we're out, and you don't see us again. I think they're looking at it as it's a real relationship. It's a friend. It's a family member. I think that's how we try to think of it and try to behave. We're not always perfect, but it's a lot of time. But it's the best time spent. Yeah.
Speaking of communication, I know you were talking about digital, or people are comfortable with that. In some way I have to kind of disagree. Sure. Because I had to deal with, like, for my father who refuses to get a cell phone. He will not get a cell phone. So we were having meetings on Zoom, and, I would have to go and Dad, wait a minute, I have to put it on mute. I had to do everything. And so they, some of them do not use it. They may have access to it. They may, and you're going to find a lot of them communicate through their children. Like my father, we just had a visit last week about the project, what they were going to do. And, he would sit there and nod his head. But then when they left, he was like, ask them about the trees in the front. So I had to run outside, and ask about the trees. They're not going to, they're going to get me to do it. So they're going to communicate through me. But as far as the digital piece, the phones, some of them, they have the cell phones. My father refuses to use them, but they have them. They only use to call. It's not FaceTime or anything like that. Some of them are good. Ms. Hubbard surprised me because we had a hybrid meeting and she was on. It was a Zoom. Yeah, it was a Zoom. Which is shocking to me. So yeah, some of them do, but some of them don't, and they're not comfortable with technology.
Yeah, I mean, it will depend on the community and the age of the community. Also, one thing to think about is if you're working with Hispanic Latino community, a language barrier, or any other community with a language barrier, that gets really tricky. Doing it virtually, it's just that much harder. So that's another spot we run into that.
Yes, well, I'm doing a quick time check. I think, we're good. Okay, so thank you. That was the last of our questions. And so thank you so much for your insights. And I think it's given a lot of food for thought as to how we continue moving this priority forward. And so that's it for the panel, but we would love to open it to the audience for any other questions while we have these folks here with us.
Well, I wonder if I could ask Joanna, I think the role of a nonprofit is vital. Sasha, I take your points on the resistance to potentially being agent of the state, employee, an agent of the state, that seems to immediately get into those trust issues. And through some of my own work and the work that we've done at the Conservation Fund, we find the value in particularly community-based organizations being that intermediary between residents and more official forms of action getting funding for projects. But I wonder, Sasha and Joanna, if you guys would talk on that. I think the mechanism is through grants. Obviously, giving grants to nonprofits is one effective way that gets out of the employment or a contractual situation. But those agreements can be with nonprofits.
They're doing.
You can start if you want.
Well, that's really how we've always done it. We have one of the nonprofits that we work with that will hold the grant that's able to then move the funds. And usually myself or Emily or Hilly, we're kind of the ones managing that on the back end and helping to move the funds and go back and forth. Yes, it's a little bit easier, and it might be an easier organization for a community to work with as well, and to have people that are on the ground nearby is also really helpful. So if it's a local organization, I think the more local, the better. So they're available, they're there to answer questions, they can be there to work with the community members as needed. That's been really, really key, having people on the ground that can pop over whenever is needed. So Shirley mentioned the virtual issues. Sometimes we have one person we work with who we have to print everything out and deliver it by hand to the house. Thankfully, Emily lives down the street, so we're able to do that. But there's just all kinds of things that come up. So the more local, I think, an organization, and I think another thing to think about is just like the right community liaison, the right nonprofit. Again, making sure it's a group that's going to be there and stay there and commit to this kind of role. One thing we, on the shore in particular, we're working. It's hard to find a community-based organization is a big title. So it's hard to find, I'll just say, a nonprofit who is focused solely on working with communities of color or low-income communities that is also focused on the environment. So often we have sort of tag team, right? So you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, so often we kind of tag team it, right? We'll have an environmental nonprofit, and we'll have a group like Mineri's Dream Alliance, if you're all familiar with that, Dunsella Wilson's group. That we kind of come together to do these kinds of things. So we have both of those, either expertise or comfort to provide. So there's not always a one size fits all either when you're going to a nonprofit, but absolutely, I think that's an easier mechanism in some ways.
Yeah,
You're not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and to build up on that, I think, right, there's different networks that we have to build. I think there's one that Kate just reminded me of through the where nonprofits apply, and then there's funding, and then they are matched up with communities. And I think that's another example too, is we only know what we know, right? And so it's a vast network of groups. And so I think that there's different ways to tap into it. But I don't want to lose sight on something. Yes, I'm an agent of the state, but I think there's also importance for us to have a seat at the table and to break down some of those barriers. Some of the largest barriers are around the regulatory, and a lot, like, I don't know what percentage, maybe Secretary Kurtz can tell us what percentage of our agency actually does that work, but there's a large percentage of our agency that doesn't do that work, and we aren't regulatory, but we have connections to other state agencies or other funding sources. So sometimes we have to walk arm in arm with our NGOs or university partners, but I think we have an important voice that also needs to be there, because at times, and especially when you're dealing with really complex issues, you get really siloed and you're kind of blinded to what else is out there. And I do it all the time in my work, so it's no fault of anyone, but I think that's some of the value that state agencies can bring into the picture. And I agree with Joanna, the ability to be like in that role as consistent and present when you don't live in the community is really hard. So I think that's where that partnership piece, that often when we are able to pop in or they can tap into us, or then ask us like, hey, who is a resource? I think, that interaction I think is really important. And that's where I've seen some of the greatest successes, like at the local level, when we are figuring out how to utilize all our different kind of resources, whether at state level or private or whatever.
I have a question about the 640,000 people with disabilities in Maryland. I'm wondering if your community ambassadors or liaisons are trained in how to make a town hall meeting, for example, accessible to people with disabilities, and to publicize it as such, so that people know that a wheelchair could get in, or they know that there'll be captions on the screen, or if they're aware that soon Google's going to come online with automatic translations that you can put on screen for meetings for 80 languages, etc. So I'm wondering if your team understands and is trained to make things accessible to community members who have disabilities. And by the way, they are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And then additionally, I think that Maryland's disabled population would make ideal community ambassadors for reasons that you might not expect. One is that they're the most underemployed population in Maryland, and there are formal structures through Secretary Beatty and Jay Greengrich and other people in state government who sort of know who they are, number one, and can help you find people looking for work. And secondly, if you get disability benefits, you're only allowed to have a certain amount of income per month or you lose your benefits. Hence, you built in to people who want part-time work for a lot of years so that they can be sustainable as employees and not lose their access to medical care, et cetera. So I'm wondering if you've thought of them as a population that is ideal for doing this kind of work.
Sorry. No, you're okay. So the first part, do the community ambassadors that we're working with, do we have specific training on how to make it as accessible as we possibly can? No, we don't have any training. I'll be honest, that's not something that we have, but I think it would be something that folks would be interested potentially in kind of doing and figuring out how to get that training. One thing, so the communities we're working with are quite small, and the community ambassadors tend to know most, if not all, of the residents, and they are pretty aware of their specific challenges, whether they are homebound, whether they're wheelchair accessible or not. We're usually using a space that's in the community that works for community members, and so we really rely on those folks to kind of let us know, hey, so-and-so is in a wheelchair, they can't get to that site. Like you mentioned, somebody may be able to use Zoom, they may not. Some folks are homebound, and we can find a way to get them on Zoom if you can make it work for us. So that's, I guess, in a limited time that we have really had conversations about disabilities, that's where it's come up, is specific to the community we're engaging. What do you know of, and what's the best way we can accommodate those folks? And we do everything we can to do that. But I think there is more we can be doing. I think you're right about that. And that is certainly a big component of disadvantaged work that I think it's overlooked in a lot of these kind of conversations. So I think it's really important for us to keep thinking about that. So I think we'd be open to having more conversations on how to do that, training, and just different things we should be thinking about. But
as you were speaking on that, it made me think, oh, that sounds like a good Lead the Shore session that could be bought in, because the community ambassadors are going to be right there along with other community members. So that would be a great session to have to teach us about the accessibility.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
Do we have time for other questions? Is there one online?
No, that we're good.
Yes.
Thanks, Patricia Mosher, Maryland, Seabrian. So I have a question that building trust is really important, but building trust also means delivering solutions. How's that being managed?
I can jump into that. I'm gonna use something from one of your Sea Grant Extension folks who we work really closely with. I'll just quickly go on a point, Sasha and Eric, you were getting at, and that's been critical for us during the work we're doing. Yes, engaging with the state throughout this process, and Sea Grant Extension and all of our partners. That's how we are able to get solutions and find strange funding pots we didn't know existed to do different things, right? Because there's tons available in the state and tons of expertise that I don't know about. I've been doing this not as long as many people. Well, that just sounded awful, didn't it? But I'm no expert in that field, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But so that has been a critical piece. So I think you're onto something there. So Eric Buell, who's a Sea Grant Extension person that we work with, who is just phenomenal. He has worked with each of our communities and works closely with the ambassadors. He is on the ground all the time. just great at what he does. He always reminds us before we go into any community meeting, do not overpromise. Be honest about what we can and can't deliver and what we do and what we don't know. And so that's something we try to be very cognizant of. That is something I have to catch myself all the time because I get very excited and we want to do as much as possible, as quickly as possible. But I think number one, being honest about the time it takes to get to a solution and to implementation. If you have to go through design, permitting, before you go to implementation, if you have to do a study before all of that, those are all different grants oftentimes, right? You can rarely get one grant to do all of it. So every grant is going to be at least 6 to 8 months before you find out if you get the funding. Sometimes then you're waiting 6, 8 plus months once you are awarded the funding to actually access the funds, and then you get to do the work. And that's one grant, and it's going to take multiple often to do a big project. So that's a significant amount of time. If you've never dealt with the quagmire of grant world, you're new to that. And it sounds like, my goodness, why would it take 3 years to do the work that we're talking about? So one is, I think, being really honest and open and saying we're going to do everything we can, but I cannot promise you we can fix everything that's happening. So that's one, that's a lesson learned, right? I think getting to solutions, I think they jumped the gun there. One is, I think for us, having as many partners engaged as possible. Everyone knows something that the other person doesn't, right? So I could give an example. Carrie, you knew that there is, I hope I'm not getting anyone in trouble here, but there is, I should have talked to you before this. Is it a survey team that's at DNR, survey team?
Engineering construction.
Engineering and construction team, and there's a pot of funding available for them to do this work in communities. We were able to bring them out to do that work in one of our communities.
Just a survey work.
Just a survey work, sorry, yeah. But that was for us pro bono, and that is work that's really absolutely impossible to get funded because it's very small, it's a very limited scale. No one wants to fund that. But that helped us understand where is the water moving, why isn't it moving where we think it should be moving, so we know what kinds of solutions to go after that are actually going to work. So I really think having your state partners, your university partners, right, all your nonprofits, as many as you can, part of that conversation, you're going to find somebody that knows something, you can find a way around it. And then I think working really closely with the community members to develop a solution that's really meeting the actual need that they're telling you, and one that's going to last. There's lots of different solutions. And if you put one in that no one ever is going to be able to maintain, or not understand, or not know what to do with, that's not going to work in the long term. So it's got to be something that's developed together. And they know better than we do the history of how things have or haven't happened in that community.
As far as me, for solutions, on a community level, there's so many. But one is the stormwater issues. I saw my dad fight with that for years. And a number of us in the household, we all had asthma. Even some of the children that they fostered had asthma. So then being educated, bringing in that information, oh, this could possibly be a cause of it, is a solution to me, because I'm starting to learn and the community is starting to learn. But actually something he fought with for years, someone is actually coming in and fixing the problem. And not only just coming in and fixing it, but they're educating and explaining what they're doing. And it's not something they're going to come in and throw dirt in and leave. I mean, it was like a process. And she's talking 3 years. And I'm like, to me, it was fast, and to watch a community we were able to see a process from the very beginning to now actually seeing something happen. So for the community to see that, that's a solution. A lot of community members, when we were sitting in Lead the Shore session, I'm going to speak for myself, but there are a majority of us, we didn't like going outside. We do not know how to swim, and I'm like, where did this fear of the environment come from? But as they started bringing in things and exposing us to different things, and not only exposing to them, like a day walking and picking up trash and having different people from organizations explain why this is important. And you look, you're clogging up this area, whatever. It was very eye-opening. It was an experience, it was experience. So the education piece and getting people to understand that taking care of the environment is important, because honestly, a lot of people don't see that as a huge issue. But when you're going in and explaining it, oh, okay, so now I understand why this is important. To me, that's a solution within itself. And I'm thinking that that's something that you want to do. That's one of your goals, is to get community members involved in taking care of our environment, not being afraid of it, but helping to take care of it. So working with Envision, the Child Tank, with several different environmental agencies, all there, and all of them pitching in, you know, Shore Rivers to Caroline County government. It was just amazing. And I think that it's working to heal some of that hurt that went on. I mean, I'm not going to say it's totally healed, but it's working to build that people can start seeing that maybe we can start trusting again. So I think that's a solution on a community level.
I think that talks to building capacity, whether that's social, whether that's environmental literacy, and building that capacity drives empowerment for the community to now know, oh, this is the consequence maybe of, or the result of some of these actions. And then the community is able to have that empowerment for themselves to be able to
having Eric come out and explain the soil, why, you know, where your house, you know, what type of soil it's sitting on, and letting you feel the difference. That was huge. Maybe, you know, to you, you are all educated in that, but for us, that was like huge. I was like, yeah, I want to play in the dirt. I want to feel that. You know, but before, you couldn't pay me to do that. But
So how could funding be structured in a way that will, what's the, you know, it's grants, what's the grant that you want to apply? Or, I know some of the things that, you know, we've been seeing for past development grants and future grants is a combination of those that is not effective because we're really emphasizing the role of continuity and trust. And this, you know, I struggled for years to have, you know, continuous projects with, you know, 1 to 2 year grants. So I know it's involved in that.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to jump in?
I mean, it's setting up those long-term kind of I mean, we did it, right? Like we are in an operations world of 1 year to 18 months, even with our federal agencies. I mean, wouldn't it be great if across some of the federal agencies that there was 5 years? And so then we could structure kind of how we take money and move it out the door, right? Or how are we combining forces with some other federal agencies to get to that level of sustained funding, I think that you're talking about, to create that consistency across those different partnerships, no matter what those mechanisms. I mean, I'm not going to lie that contract management is not one of the highlights of my job. I mean, I've learned a lot and I'm learning to figure out these puzzle pieces. So maybe in that sense, I'm expanding my problem solving abilities, but there are a lot of hurdles and a lot of barriers. And it's not just at the state level, it's at the federal level. It's about who you can contract with. I mean, we could go on for hours, right, about all those different hurdles. So, but I think at the end of the day, like having those sustained sources, like even having some federal funding, we're still having to go out for competitive grant funds for these larger dollar, like tens of millions, hundreds of millions. And there's not only on our side, the project management side, but like on the fiscal side, that is a really heavy lift. So, you know, I would like to see, at least at a state level, and then certainly want to give you a chance, like longer term, like this year over year stuff is, I feel like we're on the constant hamster wheel. So I think if we can start solving some of that, and that's a collectively, I mean, that's big federal discussion.
But anyway, we talk about the whole watershed act, looking at the season report, you know, how do we, you know, how do we address things more comprehensively? And it's hard to do it in little blocks, but it's hard to do it big too. So how do you manage bigger money, longer money, and still be fiscally responsible, have it be competitive? You know, there's multiple agencies, nonprofits, and
We work in a big community of factors. How do we help each other solve the issues? Yeah. Well, I have a few thoughts on the grants. I think Sasha, like you said, longer timelines is certainly a big piece of that. You know, in some cases, I think you could combine those phases together. Like I said, oftentimes you have to go after a design grant, permitting grant, implementation grant, capacity building grant. Those are all separate grants. It takes a lot of time to develop those grant proposals. I'm sure you all know that, and to manage them on the back end. So every time you have to do that, I don't want to say losing, but you're taking months of multiple people's time to kind of go through that process each time, and you're reporting to all those different ones as well. So it's a lot of time and capacity that gets pulled for those. So if there's a way to, in some cases, to combine those phases, I think that would be great. I think also in implementation grants, if you can allow for funds to be used for capacity building, that's good as well. More flexible, obviously, funds are great. That's, I understand, really hard to do with public dollars, federal and state. In some cases, you can't do that. We know that. It's hard, you know, in some cases. So the group that Sasha alluded to, Louisiana, that started the Lead the Coast program, which our Lead the Shore is based off of, they paid for things like childcare. They paid for things like transportation to the meetings. I was talking to a community member just last night. They did a great cleanup. They pulled out, I don't remember, is it 47, 70 tires? 72 tires, very small community. So a lot of work, but to just dispose of tires, you have to pay to do that. And she came out of her pocket and paid $300 to do that. That's not a small amount of money. And so I'm immediately thinking, what funding do I have that I can move that will allow me to use it for that purpose, or we can make it work, right? So that's what's going through my head. So these costs that are not easy to get covered, but they're absolutely critical to doing this kind of work. I think also one of the biggest things we run into at these projects, so we're working with fairly small communities, communities of color, some cases, low-income communities. These are not projects that are typically going to get you the highest nutrient and sediment reductions. They just aren't. Oftentimes they're smaller projects, or there's multiple small projects cobbled together. They're not always right on the waterfront, so you're not going to be getting those really flashy, sexy, big shoreline projects sometimes. And those do not rank high enough often in many of our implementation grant programs to get funded. So I don't know what the answer is, but I know there are a number of us that would certainly love to work with you on figuring that out. But I think there needs to be a separate criteria. If you really truly want to do more work in underserved communities, it's either got to be separated, or you've got to incorporate other criteria or higher rankings and something in existing programs to make those rise to the top. Because most of the underserved communities we work with are getting left out of some of those really big grant programs. They're just not going to compete against some of the bigger, sexier nutrient sediment reduction ones.
And I think that's it for time. So I really, no, thank you so much for all of your insights, and it's been great. Thank you for coming here and your
Thank you all very much. I think this is one of the things when we sit down and talk about this, and I think we're getting at that, is like issue, difficult, this is hard, this isn't working, right? But I think the thing that I found really inspiring today is the drive to want to achieve it. I think having more conversations like this and starting to tackle some of those issues, I think is going to be really important for us to be successful in building resiliency in communities and with communities. And one of the things that I was told early in my career, and I have just seen it be true over and over again, is that one of the most important things we can do for resilience is build community cohesion and social cohesion. And how we factor that into, and I think to your point as an outcome, is really difficult as a state. But I think by building bigger partnerships like what we're going to be able to do with enlargement, we can actually factor that in the appropriate spaces with the appropriate players, right? So I'm excited about that. See, there's a question. Oh, okay. So we are so thank you all very much. Again, I think this is the beginning of not to get you all a lot of work here, but I think for us, a really important conversation to have with everyone. So thank you. All right, so we are going to turn to our Office of Resilience update, and I know that Mike is not here, but the Deputy Director, Summer Bovino, is available to give us an update. We're thrilled to have Summer, I think new to the team, but has years of experience, comes from the American Flood Coalition, to really help us think about resilience broadly and help us think about resilience as it pertains to climate change and to natural resources in the environment. So I will turn it over to you, Summer, for an update from the Resilience Office.
Great. Thank you so much, Secretary Kurtz. And hopefully you all can hear me okay. But if not, just, let me know. I am Summer Modolfino. I'm the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer, as Secretary Kurtz just said, in the newly established Maryland Office of Resilience. I'm guessing this group is pretty familiar with that office, but just to give a little bit of context before I get into the updates, we're located within MDEM, within emergency management, and our statutory role really centers on coordinating across state and local government to put together a comprehensive resilience strategy for the state, and also provide technical assistance to locals and to communities. And today I wanted to give an update which will build off of some of the updates that Mike Hinson, the Chief Resilience Officer, has provided in the past. So I believe in the past he shared with this group a little bit about our plans for this year and some of the big priorities that we have, as well as what our engagement strategy is going to look like for engaging our partners across state agencies. And just to recap, this might be something he's already shared, but we're taking a 3-tiered approach to engaging our partners across state agencies. So those 3 tiers are executive stakeholders, that would be secretaries and other executives, what we're referring to as Leadership Council, which will consist of leaders within state agencies that oversee resilience portfolios and are making decisions around finance and budget, and then operations and planning. So that'll be folks who are executing resilience programs day to day and are really sort of on the ground and can help inform our understanding of what exists and what the gaps are. And we wanted to share a little bit of our progress in setting up those stakeholder groups because we've been able to gain a little bit of momentum in the past week or so. So last week we held our first meeting with the executive stakeholders. So that again is the annual group that consists of secretaries and other high-level executives within state government. Secretary Kurtz was there and provided some really helpful feedback on community engagement, which has been great to hear folks talk about today. Also last week, we presented to the Maryland Resiliency Partnership about how we might work with that group and its members on operations and planning. And I know there's a lot of overlap between Maryland Resiliency Partnership and the ARWG, so I see some familiar faces in the room from that meeting as well. So just to kind of recap, we've been able to establish that executive stakeholders group. We're making some really solid progress in establishing operations and planning, and that just leaves the Leadership Council, which we're hoping to get off the ground within the next few weeks, hopefully within June, and we'll have an update about that soon for all of you. And several of you are probably already in communication with Mike and myself about that. I do just want to emphasize that I'm only describing kind of the state agency engagement piece right now. It's also a big priority for us to engage local governments. Mike and myself are currently at a symposium with a bunch of folks from county emergency management. So we're doing a little bit of that this week, as well as businesses, community-based organizations, as well as other nonprofit, academic, and civic leaders. So even though you've probably mostly heard from me and Mike about the state agency engagement side of the equation, that's just because we're getting our own house in order first. But we'll definitely be reaching out through this group as we're setting up some other stakeholder engagement with non-state government and even non-government and more community-based leaders to set up the resilience work that we're doing. So that's pretty much the update that we have for all of you. Secretary Kurtz alluded to this, but we've also officially got all of our staff hired and up and running, so the office is live. Please feel free to reach out to me, to Mike, to any of us if you have questions or want to connect now that we're really starting to kick off this work in earnest. But that is all I have for the update.
Great. Thank you very much, Summer. And yeah, I enjoyed participating on the executive call last week and looking forward just for the continued rollout. I think we have such an incredible opportunity here too to really help inform you all as you build up the work, and really appreciate the partnership from you and Mike and the rest of the team so far. And we're going to continue to keep you guys on the agenda every one of these ARWG meetings, I think, because it's important for all of us to stay connected, and we want to be a resource for you as well as you build out the work. So thank you very much for that partnership. All right, so we are going to move on to public comment section of a portion of the meeting. I do see a public comment request from Mr. Jeff Silva. If you are another member of the public who would like to make a comment, please put your name in the chat box or raise your hand if you are in the room. Okay, so name in the chat box if you're online. Jeff Silva, please take it away. If you could keep it under 5 minutes so that we can make sure we give time for other members of the public, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. Basically, I've been attending all these work group meetings, as many as I could possibly avail myself to. And I want to thank you very much for having this one. This one sounds very integrated with the desire to open up and serve the communities that are most difficult to be able to reach, considering about climate change. And nothing's more inclusive than a global catastrophe that we're confronting. And thank you for confronting it. My comment is basically the outreach should be one towards identifying the low income and also the racially disadvantaged communities. I think that what would happen is if the state pours its initial resources into those communities, it will catch the attention of the racial majority population, and they'll possibly be far more, they'll catch their attention, hopefully in a good characteristic way. And even if it's detrimental, the fact is that it will draw their attention that somebody's taking climate change seriously. And that if it's important enough for the poorest among us and the most disadvantaged to be receiving attention, then apparently this must be a serious issue that demands everybody's cooperation with. And maybe they need a wake-up call, because as you could tell when you go through any of their not neighborhoods, but those areas of the country out on the Eastern Shore or Mountain Maryland, the airwaves are pretty much dominated by climate denial commentary that comes from their news sources. So they need a wake-up call. And I think helping the underserved community directly, making that effort, will draw attention to the state actually taking this seriously, and it might actually get them to work through their resistance if we're persistent, and also it will show that we're not backing down. Thank you very much. Good luck with this.
Thank you, Jeff. And I do not see any other names in the chat. We'll give you another couple of seconds. Is there any other public comment? All right, thank you all very much for the comments, and thank everybody for the meeting. We're going to wrap this up now. We did not hold time this week because we wanted to give as much time for the panel as possible to think about and talk about some of the potential recommendations we could have for statute or regulatory change. So little homework, please think about that in the interim before our next meeting. And we will have that back on the next time for conversation. So thank you very much for the time today. Rylan, is there anything else we want to wrap up with? All right.
Thank you again to our panelists.
Yes, thank you very much. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.